The room wasn't a movie set. There were no camera crews, no bright lights, no director shouting, "Action!" But every single person inside the U.S. Supreme Court was staring at him, Denzel Washington, as if they were waiting for him to slip, to fail, to prove that he didn't belong. He wasn't holding a script this time, he was holding the Constitution. Denzel's navy suit was pressed and quiet. His footsteps echoed through the marble floor like he'd walked into something sacred or dangerous. On each side of the courtroom, seasoned lawyers whispered, "Is this real? Why is an actor arguing before the highest court in America?" To them, he was an outsider, a performer, someone who had no business being there. But what they didn't know, what none of them saw coming, was that this man had spent 5 years of his life in silence, studying the law, not for the cameras, not for attention, but because he believed justice wasn't being served. And now he was here, not to perform, but to confront power. They whispered, not loud enough to be heard, but loud enough to be felt. On the left side of the courtroom, a gray-haired corporate attorney leaned in toward his colleague and muttered, "This isn't Hollywood. Let's see if he can even make it 5 minutes." Behind him, a pair of law clerks smirked, scribbling something on a legal pad. Across the aisle, a professor from a top law school raised an eyebrow. The message was the same, in every glance, every quiet chuckle. He doesn't belong here. Even some of the justices couldn't hide it. One leaned back, arms crossed, staring down at Denzel with a look that said, "Amuse me." Another tapped their pen impatiently, already convinced this was a waste of the court's time. There was a chill in the room, not from the air conditioning, but from the cold arrogance of people who believed they were born into the law. And this man, this outsider, was trespassing. But Denzel didn't flinch. Because he had heard whispers before, on sets, in studios, in rooms where he wasn't supposed to succeed. And every time, he turned them into silence. 42 seconds. That's all it took. Denzel had barely finished his opening sentence when Chief Justice John Roberts leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice cold. "Mr. Washington," he interrupted, not with curiosity, not with fairness, but with a tone soaked in condescension. "While I appreciate your interest in this matter, I find it difficult to believe that someone from your background fully understands the constitutional implications of your position." The words landed like a punch beneath a velvet glove. No shouting, no slurs, just a thin blade of doubt, carefully sharpened, and now pressed to Denzel's credibility in front of the world. The room didn't gasp, but it shifted. You could feel the tension tighten, the quiet shame of those who had hoped Denzel would fail now given fuel. It wasn't just a challenge to his legal argument. It was a challenge to his place in that room, to his very right to speak. And yet, Denzel didn't blink. No anger, no sarcasm, just calm. He met Roberts's gaze directly, not like a student staring at a teacher, but like an equal, staring down a man who had just made a mistake. Denzel didn't answer right away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend his background. Instead, with the kind of stillness that only comes from years of public scrutiny, he reached down and opened a thin leather portfolio resting quietly on the podium. It wasn't a prop. It wasn't Hollywood. It was real. Inside were pages, worn, tabbed, and marked with handwritten notes, not from an assistant, not from a legal team, from him. He pulled out a single document, a photocopy of the U.S. Constitution, annotated in the margins with bold strokes of black ink. The room shifted again, this time not with scorn, but confusion. Was he really about to argue with the Chief Justice, using the very document Roberts had sworn to uphold? Yes, he was. Then, with calm precision, Denzel looked up and said, "Chief Justice Roberts, I believe we should revisit the Fifth Amendment together, as the founders understood it." And just like that, the performance everyone expected turned into something else entirely. A confrontation built on fact, history, and raw preparation. The room was still. Too still. Even the clerks had stopped writing. Even the reporters had paused their typing. Because in that moment, something had shifted. Denzel flipped open the Constitution, page by page, line by line, not for dramatic effect, not for show, but because he meant it. Then came the line that no one in the Supreme Court had expected to hear from a man they once saw as just a movie star. "Chief Justice Roberts," he said, voice calm but unmistakably firm, "let's revisit the Constitution together, not as symbols of power, but as students of its original meaning." Roberts blinked. Just once. Denzel pulled out a folded letter. Handwritten words from James Madison himself, preserved in the Library of Congress, now reprinted and annotated by Denzel's own hand. "This letter," he continued, "shows that Madison believed property protections were intertwined with due process, and that arbitrary seizures, like the one at the heart of this case, violated both." Silence. Complete. For one chilling moment, it felt as if America's most powerful courtroom had forgotten how to breathe. At first, people had listened with polite tolerance, some with smirks, others with silent judgment. They thought they were watching an actor pretend to be a lawyer. They thought this was a performance, an impressive monologue maybe, but still just words without weight. But something had changed. The cadence in Denzel's voice wasn't theatrical. It was methodical, measured, cited, rooted in history, and backed by law. He wasn't playing brilliant. He was brilliant. He referenced 19th century court decisions, originalist theory, and handwritten letters from the founders with the ease of a seasoned legal scholar. The courtroom began to lean in. Justice Elena Kagan, who'd earlier shown mild skepticism, now sat forward in her chair. Justice Clarence Thomas, rarely expressive, was watching intently. Even Chief Justice Roberts wasn't smiling anymore. The confidence on his face had shifted, replaced by something tighter, more thoughtful. Not fear, not shame, but recognition. This man had not come to entertain. He had come to educate and to challenge. It wasn't in the tabloids. It wasn't on TMZ. There was no red carpet, no press release, no viral interview, because Denzel never told anyone. While the world was watching him light up screens in blockbuster films, he was spending late nights in a quiet corner of his home, buried in law books. While fans cheered his performances, he was reading constitutional case law by candlelight, trying to understand not just the words, but the intent behind them. For 5 years, he juggled scripts and statutes, on set by day, in law school by night. Not for a role, but for a purpose. Howard University School of Law became his second world. No VIP treatment, no special exemptions. He didn't want to be treated like a celebrity. He wanted to be tested like a scholar. His professors knew the truth, but many of his classmates didn't even realize who they were sitting next to. Because Denzel didn't act like the star of the room. He acted like a student. And when he graduated, quietly, with honors, he didn't post a photo. He didn't take a bow. He just got back to work. Building a legal mind the world would one day be forced to respect. For Denzel, this wasn't about adding another trophy to his shelf. He already had the Oscars, the Emmys, the Lifetime Achievement Awards, but none of those could stop the pain he saw in headlines, in neighborhoods, in broken systems where the law failed the people it was meant to protect. He didn't study law for attention. He studied law because he was tired of watching injustice get the last word. While Hollywood praised his voice on screen, he used that same voice behind closed doors. Not for applause, but for impact. In his second year at Howard, he began quietly funding scholarships for young black law students. No press, no announcements, not even a name attached. He told the university, "I don't want credit. I want change." That's who he was. A man who could have taken his fame and stayed in the spotlight. But instead, he chose to sit in silence in the back of a law library, so that one day he could stand in the front of a courtroom and speak for those who never got the chance. Most students were just trying to pass contracts. Most professors were just trying to stay on schedule. But one man, Professor Marcus Johnson, saw something else entirely. He still remembers the first time Denzel walked into his classroom. No entourage. No "I'm a celebrity" attitude. Just a man in the back row, notebook open, pen ready. Weeks went by before Johnson realized who he really was. He didn't speak unless he had something worth saying, the professor recalls. He didn't act like a star. He acted like someone who had come to learn, like someone with a mission. One afternoon, after class, Johnson finally asked him, "Why are you here?" Denzel smiled. "Because someday I want to stand in a room where the law is broken and fix it." Years later, after the Supreme Court argument, when Denzel's name echoed through headlines and law schools across America, Professor Johnson simply shook his head and said to a colleague, "None of those students ever realized they were sitting next to the man who would help rewrite American law." Chief Justice Roberts leaned forward again, but this time he wasn't condescending. He was strategic. This wasn't personal anymore. It was war, legal war, and he had just loaded his first real weapon. "Mr. Washington," Roberts began, "your brief argues that civil forfeiture was historically limited to maritime and customs contexts. But how do you explain the Palmyra, an 1827 case where this court upheld forfeiture without a criminal conviction?" It was a classic judicial trap. Roberts wasn't just testing Denzel, he was inviting him to fall. The Palmyra had buried more than a few attorneys over the years. It was complex, murky, and often misinterpreted. One misstep, one incorrect citation, and the entire argument would unravel. All Roberts had to do was wait. Wait for the movie star to fumble. Wait for the courtroom to smile. Wait for the headlines to write themselves. But Denzel didn't flinch. There was a pause, just a beat, as if the room held its breath, waiting for the collapse. Then Denzel looked up, not flustered, not even mildly surprised. Page 23, Chief Justice. His voice was steady, controlled. No arrogance, just certainty. He didn't glance down. He didn't need to. He knew exactly where the case was addressed in his 40-page brief, and he went straight to it, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "The Palmyra," he began, "was a maritime seizure involving piracy." Justice Story's opinion, while acknowledging forfeiture without a criminal conviction, was narrowly grounded in the unique challenges of admiralty law, where personal jurisdiction over the accused is often impossible. And then, without missing a beat, but Justice Story never intended that fiction to become the rule in domestic land-based seizures. And he said so. The courtroom didn't gasp, it froze, because in less than 30 seconds, Denzel had not only spotted the trap, he dismantled it. Roberts sat back. No words, no smirk. Just silence, and a look of reluctant respect beginning to form. The courtroom was no longer just a place of judgment. It had become an arena of revelation. Justice Elena Kagan, who had earlier shown a faint frown of skepticism, now leaned forward in her chair. Justice Amy Coney Barrett adjusted her glasses, eyes narrowing in focus. Justice Clarence Thomas, usually a silent observer, was sitting upright, completely engaged. One by one, the justices were drawn in, not by spectacle, but by substance. Denzel wasn't just speaking law. He was shaping the room's energy, commanding attention with every precise word. It was as if the very air had changed. Where moments ago doubt and dismissal hung thick, now there was respect, curiosity, a profound acknowledgement that this wasn't performance. This was brilliance. And Denzel Washington was at the center, quietly, confidently, irreversibly shifting the balance. With deliberate calm, Denzel reached into his folder. From beneath a stack of papers, he pulled out something different. A photocopy of a handwritten letter, penned nearly 250 years ago by James Madison himself. A letter never before cited in modern civil forfeiture cases. The courtroom leaned in. Denzel's voice lowered slightly, carrying the weight of history. This letter reveals what Madison called a double violence. The harm caused when a citizen's property is taken away without due process or just compensation. He paused, letting the words settle. Madison argued that seizing property without fair procedure is not just a violation of the takings clause, it's an attack on the very rights that form the foundation of ordered liberty. A silence fell over the room, heavier than before. It was more than a legal argument now. It was a reminder of the nation's founding promises, and a challenge to how far those promises had been forgotten. Denzel paused, then looked directly at the justices. "If this court is willing to reconsider civil forfeiture laws," he said, "I propose a three-part test to protect citizens' constitutional rights while allowing legitimate law enforcement." He raised 3 fingers, counting off each point carefully. "First," he began, "the government must establish a substantial and direct connection between the property and criminal activity, not a vague or tenuous link. Second," he continued, "where the property owner is subject to jurisdiction, due process requires either a criminal conviction or clear and convincing evidence that the owner knew of and consented to the illegal use. Third," he concluded, "the forfeiture must serve a genuine public purpose, addressing specific harms, not simply generating government revenue." The room sat in silence. This was no longer just argument. This was a roadmap for justice, a blueprint for safeguarding rights while respecting law enforcement's role. For a moment, there was no sound, no whispers, no coughs, no shifting in seats, just a heavy, profound silence that filled every corner of the courtroom. Then, from the front, came a voice, calm, measured, and unexpected. "Thank you, Mr. Washington." It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but those words carried a weight no one had anticipated. The man who had sought to embarrass him, the man who had questioned his very right to stand there, had just given him something far greater. Respect. Inside, a silent applause echoed through the minds of everyone present. Not for a celebrity, not for a performance, but for brilliance, courage, and undeniable truth. The tide had turned, and nobody in that room would forget it. After weeks of intense deliberation, the Supreme Court finally delivered its ruling. 7 votes to 2 in favor of limiting the government's power to seize property without criminal convictions. The majority opinion wasn't vague or watered down. It was bold, clear, and echoed Denzel Washington's arguments not once, but 4 times throughout the text. Chief Justice Roberts, who authored the majority opinion, wrote, "Civil forfeiture, as currently practiced, has expanded beyond its constitutional limits. The protection of private property rights demands strict adherence to due process and public purpose." The court adopted the three-part test Denzel proposed, setting a new standard for evaluating civil forfeiture cases nationwide. For millions of Americans, especially those in communities disproportionately affected by aggressive seizures, this was a monumental victory. Justice Thomas and Justice Sotomayor issued powerful concurrences, emphasizing the urgent need to protect vulnerable communities from unjust property takings. The ruling sent shockwaves far beyond the walls of the Supreme Court. States across the nation scrambled to revise their civil forfeiture laws. Millions of dollars in seized assets were returned to families and community organizations. The Washington Justice Initiative, founded by Denzel himself, expanded rapidly, providing legal aid to those wronged by previous forfeiture practices. Media outlets began calling it a legal earthquake, a seismic shift toward fairness and justice. For many, it was the first time in decades they saw the law serve the people, not the other way around. Months later, at a Georgetown Law School forum, an unexpected moment unfolded. Chief Justice Roberts took the stage alongside Denzel Washington. Addressing the crowd, Roberts admitted openly, "I was wrong. Mr. Washington taught me a valuable lesson, never to underestimate brilliance that comes from unexpected places." The two men shared a knowing smile, a rare moment of mutual respect and humility. It was more than reconciliation. It was a powerful symbol that even the highest seats of power can change when confronted with truth and courage. Denzel Washington never walked away from the spotlight. He still captivated millions with his powerful performances. But something had changed. Now, he wasn't just an actor. He had become a symbol of intellect, of justice, and of relentless determination. His journey showed that brilliance isn't confined to one stage. It's forged in quiet libraries, in courtrooms, and in the courage to stand up when it matters most. Denzel embraced this new role with humility, using his voice not just to entertain, but to advocate. Not just to inspire, but to ignite real change. True justice doesn't care about the color of your skin. It doesn't bow to the power of your fame. It listens to ideas, to truth, to reason. Denzel Washington's journey reminds us that the law works best when it judges arguments, not appearances. In a world still scarred by prejudice and division, this is a radical truth, that brilliance and justice can come from anywhere and anyone. The system is only as strong as its willingness to hear every voice, not just the loudest, nor the most expected. And when we let ideas win over identity, we get closer to the justice we all deserve. You might be underestimated, dismissed because of where you come from, or what others expect you to be. But here's the truth. If you prepare, if you stand up, you can change a nation. Denzel Washington showed us that greatness isn't about fame or background. It's about courage, knowledge, and the will to fight for what's right. So don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the spotlight. Be ready. Be bold. Because your voice, your truth, could be the one that changes everything. This story teaches us a powerful truth. Never underestimate the strength of preparation, courage, and quiet determination. No matter where you come from or what others expect of you, your knowledge and conviction can break barriers and rewrite history. When faced with doubt or prejudice, don't retreat or remain silent. Stand firm, arm yourself with truth, and speak boldly. True change comes from those who dare to challenge the status quo, not with noise, but with relentless commitment to justice. Remember, your voice matters, your actions matter, and you have the power to make a difference. If this story inspired you, hit the subscribe button and join AZ Exposed, where we uncover the hidden truths and share stories of courage, justice, and unexpected heroes. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video to spread the message. Together, we can shine a light on injustice and empower change.